good afternoon. Nitani ku no aksaki. Okay. Hello, my name is Mary Ellen Little Mustache in English, and in Blackfoot my name is Noaksaki. Nitani ku Noaksaki. That means my name is Noaksaki. I am a Pikanaki. I am Pikanaki, both from the United States and from Canada. I was born in Browning, Montana, where my mother was from. She was Amskapi Pikani. That means Southern Pagan. And that reside in the state of Montana in the USA. My father's band is the Abatsipikani. Abatsipikani are residing on the Piikani First Nation Reserve in Brockett, Alberta. Throughout my life, I have gone back and forth between the two countries and have always been a part of learning my culture. I had grandmothers, aunties, grandfathers, uncles, my parents, my cousins, large extended family who helped me to navigate the world that is very difficult living on an Indian reserve. So from the earliest memories, I was going back and forth, and I had very little contact with the outside world. I would go directly from Brockett to Browning, and then from Browning back to Brockett again. And along the way on the Ghana Reserve, we had cousins that were also our relatives. So in the course of my lifetime, I started out my adult career in the field of social work. And so at that time I was working with families. And because of the work that I did and the reputation that I gained in the community, it set the course for my lifetime. I've always worked with people, I've helped people, and at the last few years it's been mostly voluntary basis. In 2008, I was the Blackfoot teacher for language in Heartbeat, Montana. And I was given the opportunity to attend an Indigenous Games clinic by the International Traditional Games organization. At that time, I was struggling as a Blackfeet language teacher, and it was a very difficult job. Having gone into that field, it was difficult because I had to do my own research and I had to come up with my own lesson plans. And that was from kindergarten to grade 12. So in that time I made contact with the elders from the community, and they helped me to make songs and games that I was able to teach the children and to engage them in the language lessons. So when I first took my first traditional games clinic, I was blown away, not only by the fun and the excitement, but it was the strength that I found that I had. I never was a physical I never got involved in physical sports all of my life. Throughout high school, I avoided that, and all the rest of my life, it was easier for me to go picking berries, to go swimming in the river, to go climbing the hills, to walk for great distances to visit my cousins. And so this was something new that I had chanced upon, and I always think it's a miracle that it came to me at that time in my life when I needed something to transfer all the love and the hope that I had for our people. I thought that just teaching the language, that would be good enough, but it was very difficult because there was a lack of resources and a lack of support for language teachers. I learned that in the 1800s there was a man, his name was Stuart Cullen, and he was commissioned by the government to go and visit native tribes throughout North America, from coast to coast, from south to north, and find out what their games were. So this man, he compiled a whole bunch of information from his travels, and he was able to categorize these games into three basic categories. One was the toys and minor amusements like dolls and play buffaloes, play horses, play teepees, and the other was the games of physical dexterity, the running games, the breathing games, all of the games that would build up your physical strength and your physical body. The third category that he chose was the games of intuition and chance. In the social situations, he would see that most often. Now, in the old days, every tribe spoke a different language. There were some basic language groups, but at that time we didn't know what they were. We just each spoke our own language. But the common language that went throughout the entire continent was sign language. And today we call that Indian Sign Language. There's very few people that know that. But 200 years ago, most everybody knew that. And it was easily adaptable when the white man came as a method of communication. We did not, as Blackfeet, have the written orthography. So even with our games being made out of natural materials, it wasn't like we could go back to a museum and look at them, or that we would go to a library and we can find books about these. So I was really impressed by the knowledge that Stuart Cullen wrote in his book. He visited many different tribes, and in all of these tribes had different ecological environments, where there was swamps, swampland, there was polar regions, there was prairies, there was deserts, there was woodlands, and the weather was a great factor in how we would move as a nomadic people. In the ancient times, we lived as a nomadic people. Our lives were portable. That meant that we traveled with the seasons, excuse me, and the buffalo was our greatest source of food. And so, with the buffalo being nomadic, we followed them. So, from earliest memories, I can remember when we would take the trees, the local trees that were along the riverbanks, and then we would go up to the mountains and we would get the teepee poles. So once we had the structure made with sticks, the buffalo hides that were all sewn together and tanned, they would be sewn together to make a teepee covering. So the sticks that we would use would be very strong, very durable, and at the same time we would put decoration on them. So when we would come into camp, and it would be a very great task for us to move to the camp. And then once we get to the camp and we settle and put up the teepees, and then once the camp was set up, and then we would have time for games. As children, we were taught to play with other children. It was encouraged, and to settle our differences amongst ourselves as well. So we learned social interaction from an early age. So there would be the elders interacting with the babies, and then as the children grew, they would go out and then be more with their own peers. My mother would take us all over the place to pick berries, and a lot of the times we had to walk. So I always am thankful for my health at this age, because I didn't live near a town where I got sugar and pop and all those bad things that would give me diseases now. I'm very thankful for my health, and I'm thankful for the teachings that my mother gave me about plants and about how we lived in the ancient times. So, getting back to 2008, I already knew these things. I knew how to peel a teepee pole. I knew how to make pegs. I knew what designs that we, as abatsi pikani, apskapi pikani, I knew the designs that we put on our sticks that we used for buttons and to stake the teepee down around the edges. The teepee poles would have to be shaved so well that there wasn't a break in the wood, because that would be a weakness. And at the same time, we had to remove all the knots so that the teepee coverings wouldn't get ripped. In the Blackfeet style teepees, we have flaps that form an air hole at the top, and that was to control the draft that would go through the teepee, so that we wouldn't get smoked out, and we had that central air heating way long time ago in our own teepees. The teepee was such a fine structure that it would last 360 days of the year. We could live in that structure, and we could make very good lives. It's been proven that the Blackfeet people have been here for tens of thousands of years. We've found archaeological digs and places where they have prehistoric horses and implements made out of stone that are in Blackfeet territory. So the original Blackfeet territory, excuse me, we had the mountains at our backbone, and the northernmost part was the Elk River, which is now called the Saskatchewan River, the North Saskatchewan that goes through Edmonton, Alberta. And then we go all the way down to the Milk River, and it goes down into the provinces of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and on the United States side, Montana and North Dakota. So the southern border was the Yellowstone River. So when you look at that large area and see the results, when our camps were first visited, before the smallpox, before the starvation that came, before the killing, our camps were huge, and we had huge rendezvous or meetings with other tribes where we would meet to play games. So once the teepees were set up and the camp was all running smoothly, everything was in order, then we could pull those teepee, those poles that hold those, excuse me, those poles that hold the teepee flaps, and they would lay them down and pull the stakes so that they would be laying perpendicular, and there would be teams on either side. And the middle part would be where the bets would be placed, and the counting sticks. So then when people played that song, and they didn't use drums, they would use sticks. And so all that sound, biksiksini, biksiksini, that's the sound of those sticks that make the hand game. So the hand game was played by so many different tribes. And if we look at it in terms of education, it would have started from a baby's first day, teaching the baby awareness, teaching the baby the songs, singing to the baby, and then going all the way up until that baby could hunt a buffalo and feed their family. So in a lifetime, the things that we would learn and what we would get from our environment was everything that we needed. So we would learn how to make toys and how to bend wood so that eventually we could make bows and arrows. We would learn how to straighten sticks, how to pick out the straight sticks. This game, these sticks, are from a game called Run and Scream. We call it Axis Bukskasi Ohkomi. Run and scream, Ohkomi. And that's, like going your hardest, loudest scream that you can give. And when we look at these sticks that I've collected have been made by some of my students. And they are so precious to me because I know that the teachings that came from the ancient times are still relevant today. A few years ago, Canada was in the process of conducting a reconciliation commission. The results of that commission was 94 calls to action. Those 94 calls to action represented every part of our lives as Native people here in Canada. And those calls to action were things that were hampering the reconciliation of the people in Canada. At the time in 2008 when I was teaching in Montana, there was a law. It was called Indian Ed for All. That meant that every school had to have cultural education. And so with these 94 calls to action, it fell directly in line with the teachings that our elders and our cultural leaders are promoting. The games are a good communication vehicle between two cultures that are so different, that are so foreign from each other, even though we reside in the same country. When I look at the designs, when I lay the beads down and I select the feathers for the kids, we recognize the identity of a person. Every person has their favorite colors, their favorite ways of doing things, and so would our weapons and our art as expressions of our creativity. Our identity was placed on every part of the materials that we used. The teepees that we made had our stories painted on them. Our clothing had our designs beaded on them or painted. And the same with our games. Everybody had their own particular choices. In some cultures, they would use the Saskatoon bush for the women's games. So women would only use Saskatoon bushes. And the men would only use the chokecherry bush. And then some people hold the red willow in the highest of honor. But the red willow is proven as a painkiller. So in addition to talking about the uses that we would use to make tools and implements for hunting, the same thing we have that same idea where we learned about the plants, how the plants could help us. We learned about plants that we could eat, plants that the berry bushes are strong and they're lasting as tools. And they're not, they hold their shape once they're dried. So when we look at making different kinds of medicine, there are ways that they have to be removed from the tree. There's ceremony that goes with the gathering of the trees. We put down tobacco. We say our prayers. We sing our songs when we gather our trees for our games, just the same as we do when we're gathering berries or when we're gathering our teepee poles. The sticks, once we remove the bark, on the inner bark is usually where the medicine is. And then the stick, the wood that's underneath, that forms the structure of the tree. And it also would give us wood to burn and flavor our food. So it was really, because in the ancient times we didn't have a lot of salt. We were lucky if we could find salt or trade for it. And so we would have to find everything that we needed for health in our environment. We knew the right kind of trees to use when we were smoking meat. The right kind of trees to keep a teepee warm all night. The right kind of trees to warm something up really fast. And the right kind of plant to make the smudge, to bring that scent that goes along with the prayers. When we offer up our prayers, especially when we're playing the games, we ask for strength, we ask for health, we ask for all of those good things that exercise brings. We know today the benefits of exercise. We know the benefits of a good mind. And with those 94 calls to action, those are deficiencies in the Native communities in Canada. They've proven that there's more Native people in jails. There's more Native people committing suicide. There's more Native people that are hooked on opioids. And so, as a young woman, I was a child welfare worker, where I would work with families. And so I've carried that into my senior years. And to use the games as a way to encourage exercise, socializing, creativity, a wonder in the world, wonder for the world, just looking at around you, having an appreciation for Isitziman. Isitziman is that tiny little plant, that first little bit of grass, that first little bud that comes out of a tree. We also use that word for our baby. A baby is called an Isitziman. So when we go back to the categories of games, we look at all the age ranges of people. We can teach the games from 0 to 100 or 150 if somebody would live that long. So in working with people, we've had a lot of sadness. We have a lot of death. And so when we gather together, I always have my games. I always have different things, not only for the children to do, but also for the adults to do. So when we're looking at our education and we're thinking about how a person develops to be somebody who is functional as an adult. As an adult in today's world, we have to know all kinds of things. But the one thing that we neglect in our education system is that wonder for the world around us. And in neglecting that, it creates so many dilemmas for people now in these times.